Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Cup Screened Plays. I am your host, Mackenzie, and today we are diving into another film adaptation of an iconic play. We started with Denzel Washington's interpretation of the Scottish play. We will not say the name here. We will not jinx ourselves. And then we did a tribute to Angela Lansbury with the film Gaslight. And now we are revisiting a film adaptation of a play we have already covered on this show. One where my co-artistic producer Ryan and I had some strong fisticuffs with one another. I know, we're ready for round two, Ryan. Get ready for round two. I got a feeling we may be in agreement a little bit more on this one.
Cool.
Either way, but the one we are talking today is the 1984 American period biographical drama film Amadeus. From 1984, directed by Miloš Forman, and it won Best Picture that year as well, among a slew of other awards. It won 8, I believe, if my Oscar count is correct. Correct me in the comments if I miscounted that, but yes, 8, including Best Actor for our Salieri, F. Murray Abraham, and our Amadeus, our Mozart, played by Tom Holtz, was also nominated for lead actor as well, but lost to Salieri. So in a cruel twist of fate, Salieri beat Mozart again. Yes. But fun fact, though, for all our Disney fans, our Amadeus Mozart there, Tom Holtz, was the voice of Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It was one of his last kind of acting roles before he's kind of now retired and gone into directing and producing. So there you go. I mean, he's done a big Oscar film. He's done Disney. He's done some other work. I mean,
he was in Animal House, right?
He was in Animal House. He was part of the original stage production of A Few Good Men, Aaron Sorkin's play that Tom Cruise eventually went on and did the film version of.
Perhaps that's something we could do a screenplay of down the line.
I would love that, Ryan. Great minds think alike. Anyway, so to discuss this very epic, dramatic piece, we have assembled some familiar faces. Returning to us from his last time in the world of Amadeus, the man who played referee to Ryan and I, it is none other than the wonderful Andrew Poirot. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Mac. Hello, Ryan. Thank you both for having me again.
You're here to keep us from getting at each other.
Well, I couldn't very well let you two tear each other to shreds. I can't have like a Mozart Salieri again.
Which one of us?
Yeah, I'm gonna stay out of that one from the get-go.
Which one of us is the idiot savant who makes beautiful points and or music, and which one of us is the jealous fiend who wants to see their demise?
A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B for both of you.
There's no good answer to that question.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'd be very careful with how you answer that. We can easily kick you out of the Zoom room, Andrew. One wrong step and you're out.
Oh gosh, I will tread lightly.
Yes. And also returning to us.
Wait, but what's in Andrew's cup?
Oh, that's true, Andrew.
Oh.
What is in your cup today?
So it's kind of blasphemous, but I have my steam whistle cup filled with sparkling water. It is blueberry pomegranate sparkling water.
Is it a bubbly, Andrew?
It is not. Usually it is, but it is an aha.
Aha.
It's just a different musical act.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Also, I'm liking your musician shirt there, Andrew. Kiss, very well.
Yeah.
Kind of a modern day Mozart of his day, some might say.
I don't know what some might say.
Yeah, who might say that?
Who might say? Maybe Andrew says it. Maybe he believes Gene Simmons is like the next Mozart. I mean, he is a very theatrical man.
Yes, I would compare that. Theatricality, I would definitely compare that.
There you go. There you go. And also returning to us is the wonderful Sarah Heim. Hello, Sarah.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me back. This is very exciting and very different than the last time I was here doing The Importance of Being Earnest, discussing one of the stage productions. So this is like gone completely the other direction.
We've got a complete 180 here.
And I love it.
And what's in your cup?
Oh yeah. Okay. So I chose to have a cappuccino today because the coffee is bitter, like Salieri is in this film, and also because the foam on top of my cappuccino really reminds me of Constanzi's giant fluffy white wig from the beginning of the film. Nice. So I tried to stay on theme with that.
You're also drinking an Italian style of coffee, and I mean,
Yeah.
Italy is referenced many a time in this.
Many times with much hostility in some
Yes.
cases.
Mozart does have some hostility toward Italian. And of course, we have my co-artistic producer, the man who I'm sure will enjoy a good spirited debate with me this episode. It is the one and only Ryan Borochovitz. Hello, Ryan.
Hello. I will enjoy a good spirited debate unless you kick me out of the Zoom room.
You have
Now
the
found
power
out you
to
can
do.
do. Andrew, stop him. You're the ref.
I will do my best.
No, happy to be here. I love this
Yes.
movie. When we reviewed this Amadeus, the stage production, last time, I feel like I made frequent comparisons to this movie, and at the time we didn't yet have the screened plays as a sub-series on the Cup, so I didn't expect that we ever would do a full review of this. So I just allowed those comparisons to run wild, and now we'll actually take a look at the work that was the subject of those comparisons in its own right, and maybe I'll compare this to the National Theatre production so many times.
I know I do.
I certainly will. So.
I imagine we will. So this is going to be fun. But yeah, happy to be here.
Yes, welcome aboard. And what's in your cup, sir?
I have my cup here. Hey, that's the show you're watching right
Yes.
now. And I also have coffee in this, not a cappuccino, just normal, standard Maxwell House, very un-Italian. And I have coffee made in it, so it's not as bitter as Salieri should be. Oh, well.
Very good. Very good. Well, I am drinking from my silver tankard, as per the norm, and I have some, what is today? It is a strawberry, orange, banana crystal light in mine. So there we go. Tally ho. All right. So let's get, first of all, everybody's first impressions about this film on the docket, because this is definitely a Oscar bait style film. When I looked up the year it won, I did not know any of the other 4 films.
Well, funny thing about that, actually, this was a big year for screened plays, as we might call them. Several of the other Best Picture nominees this year, I also just looked it up right before we started recording, but David Lean's A Passage to India, which is based on E.M. Forster's novel, but it is specifically based on a stage adaptation of it by a playwright named Santha Rama Rao. So there was another play in the running, also A Soldier's Story, directed by Norman Jewison, which is based on a play of the same name by Charles Fuller, who also just passed away recently, in Toronto, mind you. And a third one, the one that actually gave it the biggest run for its money, The Killing Fields, the movie about the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. Not based on a play, but those familiar with the work of the monologuist Spalding Gray might remember this movie as the basis of his monologue Swimming to Cambodia, because he had a small role in this film and then created a monologue around that. So there was a lot of theater competition going on in this year's Oscars.
There is.
Sorry, I monologued on that. But
No,
I got excited when I discovered that on
talking about
Wikipedia.
Exactly what I was going to say. So we're on so far we're simpatico with each other.
All right, let's hope it stays that way.
Let's hope so. But yeah, I mean, once again, this was an Oscar bait film. It clearly swung the vote back in the day. It's based off this Peter Shaffer, thank you. Shaffer play. And it should be noted that the original Amadeus and Salieri on Broadway were Ian McKellen and Tim Curry. And the fact there is no recording of that cast breaks my heart.
Horrible.
Yeah,
Horrible. But, everybody, let's kind of get our thoughts on the table. Sarah, as the newest person to the world of Amadeus on this panel, what were your thoughts on this? Did you know the play well before you kind of got into it?
I did not know the play. And so I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later potentially as well. So, but I was not familiar with it going in. So I did not know exactly what to expect. And I also didn't know a huge amount about the movie aside from its sort of topic. And I have to say, I really, really enjoyed the film immensely, like even more than I think that maybe I had expected to. Just so many things impressed me about it. I think what really struck me was that, a lot of movies have been made since 1984, and I've seen a lot of movies, and I feel like I've never seen something like this. It's really unique, and I think I was thinking about why, and I think I was impressed by the scale of it. I love a period piece. I watch a lot of period pieces, but I've never seen something that is just so vast in its scale. They did not shy away from a crowd scene. They did not shy away from a party. The costumes, the wigs, the just sheer amount of things that were going on, which is just incredible. But at the same time, I think the story is so interesting. I was hooked and fascinated from the beginning. The performances, of course, are great, and I know we'll talk more about that as well. But I think what I really enjoyed about it, what maybe struck me as why it felt so different than other things that I've seen, is while it was very period appropriate and the dress and the production design, it was very in its period. The way that the characters spoke, the way the dialogue was written, the way that they moved and interacted with one another almost felt a little bit modern. It didn't have that sort of extra level of formality and that sometimes and stiffness that you can get in a period piece. And so while it was this tale from history, it still felt very relatable. It felt like I could know this person. I could, even the king, right? Like I could know that guy. He kind of just talks like a guy with maybe a little extra power than your average bloke on the street. So yeah, it was fascinating to me, and I really, really enjoyed it. So I'm very excited that you brought me on the panel and gave me this reason to watch it and talk about it.
Oh, we're so happy to have you. Andrew, what are your comments on this?
I also really enjoyed it, but I think the enjoyment took a little bit because I far too much had the National Theatre's version playing in my head. So every time the film deviated from that, and it deviated from it a lot in the beginning, I found myself going, what's happening? Why are we doing this? Where are we going? And kind of questioning myself, and we'll get into this later about the adaptation of it, questioning myself as like, what's going on? But once I was able to let go and just go, this is a film, this is not the play, I was able to go, oh, really cool, really fun, and really interesting take on the original work. I also really enjoyed the fact that there was such grandeur about the entire movie. Like you said, the costumes, the crowd scenes, again, kind of referring back to the National Theatre version, seeing a filmed version of the operas that both composers created and seeing what that looks like in the interpretation within the time context was really cool. And I found myself really taken like for a ride on like, oh, wow, this is really cool. Like, this is a weird thing to say, but a really cool editing, because I found myself kind of like shaken a whole which way and the other. So I think for that reason, I can see why it got its Oscar, because it was a very enjoyable film.
Love it. Love it. Ryan?
Yeah, I have to completely agree with both of you. I think this film is great. It's not just a great movie, it's kind of the great movie, but not that there's only one, but it is sort of just a perfect movie. If you're kind of trying to think of what are some of the best movies ever, what belongs on a film like theory syllabus, this kind of has to have a place on there. And it is just so well made. We'll talk about some of the technical craft probably as we go, but like Miloš Forman, R.I.P., because he was such a brilliant filmmaker. He made so many movies that I personally love so much, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Ragtime. And he just had, I think I even said this last time in those many comparisons I made between the stage version and the movie, but he just had such a brilliant grasp of just the brass tacks language of film. And there's so many little moments you could just point to. You could kind of pick up this movie at any random moment, watch any random scene, and it tells a story in its own right. And just the way that he understands visual style and flair and really pulls together what is kind of this perfect work of art that, you know, maybe it has some flaws. So I'm not using the word perfect lightly here, but I do think just overall the whole is so much greater than the sum of its parts, and the sum of its parts are still pretty great. I have more I could say about history, about adaptation, but we have questions for all of those and all the performances, no doubt. But yeah, I think I'll just leave it at it's funny, earlier in the pandemic, remember when everybody was doing the thing where, you know, tag your friend in like 10 stills from movies and, you know, just something to do to keep us busy while we were all bored out of our minds. And this movie very, very nearly made my cut for top 10. It didn't in the end, but you know,
Ryan?
Well, 10 other movies that I'm not going to list now.
All right.
But the fact that it was so close, you know, it's so hard to pick 10 favorites of anything. But yeah, it was definitely one that was on my mind as a contender. Yeah, it's just a great movie. Everybody should go see this, regardless of your familiarity with Mozart, your familiarity with the play it's based on. It is kind of just a wonderful aesthetic experience.
Yes. And I will fourth everything that has already been said. I mean, this is when people talk about a Best Picture winner, this is what people picture. I mean, now we're kind of into the world of the indie film, like we just saw with Everything Everywhere All at Once and Coda, some of those smaller interpersonal dramas. But when I think of Best Picture winners, this is where I go. Like Amadeus, Titanic, Ben-Hur, some of those big films that just warrant you having to go out into the world to see them. You got to go see it on the biggest screen possible just to take in the beauty and the majesty that this piece brings you. I mean, we've talked about just the scale of this film. And this is why a play like this lends itself so well to a adaptation. Well, there are some plays that sometimes don't because they're so microscopic and it's a family drama like August Osage County. That is a lovely film, but it's all set inside a house and didn't quite capture the drama like you do when you're stuck in a claustrophobic theater space watching this family rip itself apart. To a certain extent, I know Ryan and I have talked about this ad nauseum. Doubt is a great film, but also at the same time, there's been arguments made that part of what makes the play so compelling is you're stuck usually in a smaller black box theater and you're with three people duking it out over this one topic. Here, you get the interpersonal dynamics of these two warring composers, but then you also have just the atmosphere that's informing who these men are. As you go, okay, I get it. I get now the world these people are playing in. Because when you do see it in stage, you can kind of show the world that's informing who these people are. But when you actually get to see the operas, the royal court in all its opulence, you go, okay, now we see why Mozart's a bit of a thorn in their sides. Now we see what Mozart has been continually working within in this world where he's going from court to court to court to court, and how he's kind of become the star person, but yet at the same time doesn't know how to play ball with all these people. And you also understand why so many of the emperor's counselors are so reticent against him, because you see the world they're playing in, and it's like, in order for them to maintain their power within the court, they gotta box Mozart in because he's gonna topple what they got going in their positions within this world. So now you get to see that bigger encapsulation of the world, while at the same time you get to go into the fine, minute moments like that first scene where Salieri meets Mozart in Costanza in the back room, and they're having that flirtatious conversation with one another. Which is great, and that scene is directly translated from the play. There's barely anything changed. But then you have these other scenes that just completely just explode the world, and you go, okay. What stage show is going to bring a horse on stage like this film does? It's like, once again, but that's what those operas were back then.
War Horse did not bring a real horse on stage.
Not a real one.
War Horse did not bring a real horse.
We saw the War Horse.
A real
version.
horse. Okay, well.
And we never got to see War Horse defecate like we got to see in this.
Yes, exactly. But it's like, when you do your historical readings of what these operas were like, they absolutely brought sheep and horses and other livestock on stage because these were huge productions. And this is where the film does so well. And I'll get more into that when we talk more about production and design for this film. But just overall, this is just an epic, dramatic film that just lives up to what a historical epic Best Picture film should be. And I hate to say it, but it is a bit of a lost film that we don't get as much nowadays because, they're big budget. And nowadays, most people, it's a hard time to get people out to the theater to see something like this.
Sorry, Mac, I don't want to start the fisticuffs too early.
All right, Ryan.
But while I hear what you're saying, I do kind of take umbrage with you classifying Everything Everywhere All at Once as like a small, intimate drama. They made like 14 different sci-fi movies in one and stitched them all together into one kind of equally perfect movie, in my opinion. But...
Yes, but if you look at the production company that did it, A24 is a smaller production house. The directors had done like music videos. They weren't Spielberg or, big names.
Anyway, we don't need to litigate this conversation now. I just didn't want to let that go uncommented on.
Yes.
We're starting early.
We're starting early. Anyway, let's get into what our thoughts on the cast were, because this is where Ryan and I began to butt heads. So Ryan, I want you to start this one.
You're starting with me. Okay, I was not expecting to go first on this question because here's the thing. If the cast is amazing. If you have to pick one shout out, there's no question that you're going to do what the Oscars did and pick F. Murray Abraham. This is his show. He steals every scene he's in. His face is like a gargoyle. He is amazing. Every word, every inflection is just spot on. Yes. He is the definitive Salieri, in my opinion. And as much as I love Lucian Massimati's interpretation that we saw in the National Theatre production, and as much as I would have loved to see Ian McKellen do it, F. Murray Abraham is Salieri. Every time he shows up in any other movie I see him in, whether it's Grand Budapest Hotel or In the Name of the Rose, I'm always like, Salieri.
Yeah. He just did actually a Marvel TV show. He just did Moon Knight.
Oh, that's funny.
Where he was the voice of one of the gods. I think it's Ra. I think.
Sure.
Yes, I forgot about that. He did. Yes, right.
Yeah, but he's amazing. He is. Yes. There's a reason why, if two actors from this are up for the same award and you can only give it to one of them, I think the Academy made the right choice and gave it to him. Yes. No disrespect to Tom Hulce, who I have other things to say about, but I'll maybe refrain from saying them here. Because I wasn't expecting to go first, though, I did have other minor shout-outs, if I may.
You may.
So I'll try to go through these quickly. Jeffrey Jones, a.k.a. Ferris Bueller's principal, who plays Emperor Joseph II.
Right.
Bit of a complicated man now. Got himself into some trouble.
Oh, no, I had not heard that.
Oh, yes.
Sad. Okay.
Yes, some I'm pretty sure it's child pornography.
Oh my God.
Stuff. Yeah.
Well, that's disappointing.
There's a reason why he is not on film anymore.
Oh.
We're taking away his shout out.
Okay, yes, rescinding the shout out.
That was also going to be my shout.
Does this kind of complicate the fact that he spent a whole day chasing down one of his students that he felt the need to? Okay. Wow, this is really bumming me out.
I told you I had some facts for you.
Wow, you weren't lying. You had some real sad facts. All right, anyway, I thought he was good in this, separate the artist from the art, but that is disappointing.
Yes. In 2003, Jones pleaded no contest to a charge of soliciting a minor to pose for nude photographs and had subsequent arrests for failing to update his sex offender status.
Content warning. Okay. Moving on. Let's not give him any more airtime than we need to. I want to briefly shout out Simon Callow, who played, I forget the character's name, but he played the librettist of the Magic Flute to the comedian.
Papageno.
What's his name? What?
His character name in Magic Flute's Papageno, but he plays Emmanuel Schlotinger. Anyway,
Either way, he originated the role of Mozart in the West End production, and I kind of think it's a very minor role he plays here, but he does it with grace. He is kind of, he's really good in every scene he's in. And there's just one moment that really sells me on him, and it's actually his last moment in the film. It is when he and the rest of the Magic Flute Company come to the door, and, Mozart thinks it's the masked man. And so they're like, oh, Salieri, you're here. Here, make sure Mozart gets this, and can we come in? And he's like, oh, yes, I'll give it to him. Goodbye. And then Simon Callow's face as the door is closing, very Godfather-like, but his face is like, I think something's up, but I can't quite put my finger on what. And we, the audience, know what, but he sells that moment so well. So he deserves a shout out, not just for originating this role, but also for doing that so well. And last one, and then I'll move on. Well, we can move on to others. Richard Frank, who plays a character that does not exist in the stage play, but is the framing device of this, the priest, Father Vogler. Because what that man can do with his face, just reacting to what someone else who's very good with his face, F. Murray Abraham. But the conversations between them are just so, it's a big departure from what the stage version does that we'll talk about more in a moment. But I think he does so much with what could just be a very thankless role. And sadly, I was looking him up earlier, so much Wikipedia rabbit hole that this movie prompts. But he actually was one of the first actors to play Roy Cohn in Angels in America. While he himself was dying of AIDS and sadly passed away from it in 1995.
Now, that's interesting.
That is pretty thematically resonant. So, I felt he deserved a special shout out. Richard Frank, who plays the confessor.
Snap, snap, snap to him.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that is all for my shout outs. Somebody else can pick up.
All right. Andrew?
I got to go with Ryan. Absolutely, I got to go with F. Murray Abraham as like the standout role for me. But I really do I have a hard time just saying that it's just F. Murray Abraham as the standout because I'm going to pronounce his last name wrong. Tom Hulce?
Tom Hulce.
Hulce. Also, see, it's, again, very difficult for me to separate this from the National Theatre version. I admire both actors because for me, they're such, compared to how big the characters Salieri and Mozart were in the stage version, to watch the subtlety and the the screen acting of both of these actors is for me so fascinating because there's like a subtle finesse that both of them have. I just found that I was drawn a little bit more to Salieri simply because for me, just watching his gears turn and get interrupted at every opportunity by Mozart, and just the subtle frustration, the plotting, the desire for vengeance, and that feeling of mediocrity that he feels at every encounter that he meets Mozart. I just kind of felt for Salieri in a weird kind of like, yeah, but you're still doing some bad stuff kind of way. So yes, for me, I think that's the standout, but I can't not mention Hulce because, again, comparing it to the stage version, I felt for the trials and tribulations that he was going through. So both incredibly well played roles from very, very well deserved Oscar nominees and winners.
Love it. Sarah?
I have to completely agree. I also kind of had both F. Murray Abraham and Tom Hulce as my sort of two favorites. I got thinking about how I feel like it really speaks to the quality of their work that I ended the movie feeling bad for both of them. And I think that the trap of this piece could be that it's a really long movie about two really unlikable people that I hate. And that would have made it long. And right? And I think that both of them brought so many layers to their characters, such complexity, such humanity to these dramatic situations that they were in and to this rivalry that by the end, I was feeling so bad for Mozart's character because underneath this garish, immature personality is like this little boy who wants his dad's approval and who never got to be a child, and he's so innocent in a way. And then, so I'm feeling terrible for him and he's being betrayed and it's horrible. And then I'm also feeling bad for Salieri because I understand that he's feeling betrayed by God and he's struggling with this mediocrity, like you said. Like I felt bad for both of them at the end. And I think that is really a testament to them approaching these characters and going, I'm not going to judge my character. I am going to figure out what makes them tick and understand what emotions are underlying these actions, and I'm going to play them like not like a villain or like a immature boy. I'm going to bring this humanity to them, and so it just that makes the movie. There's so many other elements as we've talked about and are going to continue to talk about that make the production value of this movie amazing. But at the end, I think about some of the blockbusters that come out these days that are big productions. And sometimes they're huge on the production, but the story, they lose a little on the story, or they lose a little on the people, or they're about unlikable people that I don't want to watch, even if the movie is huge and crazy. And this one did it all. I got to see this great production film and then also go, wow, I really care about these two crazy people and feel for them. And it's like you were saying, they take the interpersonal dynamics and bring them to life in such a believable and true and honest way. That I'm so gripped by that. And I get to see all this amazing spectacle. So and actually, I guess maybe where I'm going with that is that it would also be easy to get lost in that spectacle if the performances were not strong enough and equal to the task. So yeah.
Love it. I will say for me, my cast shout out does not go to F. Murray Abraham, even though I do love him. He rightfully held that film and earned his Oscar. But I have to give my shout out to Tom Hulce as Mozart because, as Ryan and I know, we duked it out last time. And because I did not like the Adam Gillen portrayal of Mozart because he was just way
you didn't like it? What?
You don't say, Max.
This is coming as news to me.
Incredible revelation happening.
Because that performance to me just was one manic note. It didn't have any variety or subtlety to it. Tom Hulce, on the other hand, brought that to this role. because Mozart can be an annoying dick throughout this piece. And if you don't have a good Mozart who has complexity to him, then you don't feel bad when he dies. And if you go back and watch my debate I had with Ryan during National Theater's production, I said I was waiting for Mozart to die by the end.
Yeah, you're supposed to. I don't get why you think that's a flaw.
Because I should feel bad Mozart's dying. When I watch Tom Holtz, my heart breaks for this man.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
My heart is like seeing him dying in bed trying to get this requiem done. And you see the beauty of the collaboration between these two men as he's getting the requiem dictated to him. And actually, fun fact, the actors actually had earpieces on and that they played the requiem in, but the director would actually cut the music off at times. Mm-hmm. So that's why when Salieri's going, no, wait, stop. It's not because that's in the script. It's because it's the improv of Abraham's earpiece would give out.
That's so cool.
Tom Holtz's wouldn't. So they wouldn't be able to sync up with each other.
That's amazing. Wow. Because it feels so perfect.
Right? Exactly. And when you watch that scene,
Andrew, your face.
It's just mind blowing. Just like, how does one think of that as a director? How does?
And it works.
Well, some of it was technology of the day.
But the fact that they got that in the cut and kept rolling and decided to, this isn't a blooper. This belongs in the movie. This makes their dialogue so much richer. That is just brilliant filmmaking to take your accidents and turn it into film magic.
Exactly.
And that scene will literally stay with me forever. It is one of those scenes that 10 years from now, I'll be thinking, I won't remember everything about this movie, but I will vividly remember that moment.
And that scene sticks with me too, because it's Tom Holtz dying in that bed. Mm-hmm. And you're going, this genius, this man who had so much more to give the world is dying. And he's not laughing. He's not lisping. He is giving a genuine performance. And you feel the pain of him losing his family and just the destruction this man is, that he collapses during this final performance of Magic Flute. And I mean, another great example is you go back and there's another scene Ryan and I debated, which is the scene where they're talking about the different styles of opera, Italian versus German. And Mozart goes on this beautiful, prosaic, poetic monologue about the power of doing a modern opera, not doing these God-based operas where it's all about gods and humanity being spared, but it's all about the humanity that you bring when you do it in like a brothel or, just a simple marriage story. And if you watch Adam Gillen do that monologue, he does this great thing. And then at the very end of the monologue, he goes, he does like a, and then, and it's like, no. You let the audience sit in that moment and go, this man has intelligence and maturity when he wants to put it out. But he's too much fun at being the boy child to actually sometimes get out of his own way. But Tom Holtz doesn't break the moment. He is so sincere in his pleading about saying, let me do the Marriage of Figaro. I know I can make this story good. I know I can do it. And he's talking about the concept of bringing all these different voices to create this octet of sound. And it's gorgeous. And it's like, he doesn't blow it. He shows his maturity of, Mozart, you actually can be mature like Salieri wants you to be. You're just a boy child who never had a childhood. So, you're partying it up because people are giving you the space to do it and not stopping you. Like that's the difference between these two performances. One didn't know how to vary and give a layered performance of who this man is. But Tom Holtz did. And that's why whenever I picture Mozart, he is the Mozart of my head. Just as with Topol, I picture him as Tevye. No matter who else I will ever see in that role, Topol is Tevye. Tom Holtz, with his little laugh he does, is Mozart. And it works. It totally works. And my secondary shout out goes to Cynthia Nixon of Sex and the City fame as the double agent maid. But she's wonderful. The terror she feels being in that household.
She's vaguely Irish for some reason, but I love her.
She's vaguely Irish, But she totally works. The fear she says when she says, I don't want to go back there. He scares me. I go, I get it. A genius descending into madness as he's trying to write his death requiem would scare the shit out of me too, because he's just so unpredictable. He's drunk, he's mad. It's like, I totally get it. She was a scene stealer, and those few moments she had where she's spying on them through the door and is pleading with Salieri, don't send me back there. It's like, perfect. Anyway, Tom Holtz, you get my shout out. I love you, F. Murray Abraham. You are a gargoyle, but the most livable gargoyle out there. Yes. I thoroughly.
Tom Holtz likes talking to gargoyles. It's a thing.
Apparently so. It's Quasimodo.
Yes. Okay.
Anyway,
sorry, Mac.
Right, Ryan,
I do.
Ready. Give it to me.
Ryan's waiting.
I just, again, we don't need to relitigate all of this because we have a whole long conversation where we did it. But
yes.
I just have to go to bat for my boy Adam Gillen just a little bit, because I think Tom Holtz is very good in this, but I kind of think at times maybe we feel for him too much in a way that I thought, which in my first few viewings of this film prior to seeing that stage version, it just made sense. It seemed like this is right. This is kind of feels like the iconic definitive performance of this role without anything specific to compare it to. But Adam Gillen made me see a different side of this character, not by adding more layers, but maybe by adding less layers. And I think it worked so well. And it's not to usurp Tom Holtz's performance, but just, I think there was something very valuable about, finding him incredibly annoying, not just because he does a silly laugh every so often, because Tom Holtz is playing a very contemporary 1980s version of a man-child that maybe hasn't quite aged. It not necessarily hasn't aged well, but hasn't aged proportionately to what man-children are like today. That you can kind of watch this and be like, yeah, he's a little silly and he laughs weird, but he's still a serious composer who, cares about his work. And whereas watching Adam Gillen's performance, take the monologue you were talking about for a moment there where he is going on and it's beautiful, and then he does a fart noise at the end and cuts the tension. That is Mozart in the logic of this play. Yes, he's saying something brilliant and you want to get lost in it, just like he writes the most beautiful music and you think it must be a genius who wrote this. But then he does a fart sound and you're like, just when I was starting to think there was more to you, maybe there isn't. And I do love the way that production really succeeds in making you want Mozart to die in a way that I don't think this film does, because it makes us care about him and his humanity too much. And I think that is maybe a difference between the film and the play in general, is that the play is way more invested in Salieri's subjectivity, that we are hearing the story as he tells it, not to a priest, but to just the audience. And while we have that framing device of he is the narrator in both versions, the film really has more of an objective God's eye in everything that's happening. But if you are going to do the version that is 100% from Salieri's perspective, we need to hate Mozart. And I don't hate Tom Holtz, which I think is, by comparison, a bit of a demerit against his performance.
Ooh. Andrew, I see you wanting to chime in here. Weigh in, referee. What say you?
Yes. Give us the red card if you need to.
Immediately? No yellow? Fine. Both of you are off the Zoom call. At the risk of leaking into our next question, I think, Ryan, you kind of alluded to this. I wonder if that's just also inherently a difference between the film adaptation of this to the play.
I think
the play definitely... Salieri is the focus, and it's so focused on Salieri finding Mozart to be just an incredible difference from the art that he creates. I agree. I think that the play is meant to portray Mozart as just this complete, grating character. And for that reason, I can understand why the National Theatre version's direction for Mozart was what it was, and why I, as an audience member, kind of grow to dislike him. But we see so much of what goes on behind the curtain for Mozart in the film. We see why he's driven into this madness and what Salieri is doing to him. We see the results of it, whereas the play, I find, focuses on just kind of the exposition of what happened, what has Salieri done, and not kind of really what the effect was on Mozart. So I think that I can see why Mac's going for Tom Holtz's performance in this one, because it seems to me like such a grand deviation from the play's intention, where the film has just gone this is what a falling artist looks like. This is what madness or being or falling into madness looks like. And we need to, in equal parts, feel bad for Salieri as this kind of betrayed composer as much as we do for Mozart, who's betrayed by this betrayed composer. So definitely see both points. No cards for either of you.
A very good nuanced synthesis. Thank you for
Andrew,
that.
you wrapped that up beautifully. Unless, Sarah, do you have any comments on Mozart's different depictions?
Well, you know what? Having not seen the stage production, I'm a little bit limited but I actually, what Andrew just said was sort of what was percolating in my mind, was that I feel like on stage, it might work really well that the perspective is Mozart is just so annoying and immature, and that's his character. I got thinking that on film, I think that could become grating and maybe one-dimensional in a way that would be challenging to watch on film. There's just something very intimate about film because you're close up to the character. It's also a long film, and I think you can sometimes get away with certain things in a long stage play, but that might not work in a long movie. I think in a movie, I care a lot more about whether I like the people or not, or even if I don't like them, can I understand them? Can I kind of get behind where they're coming from? So I haven't seen the stage production, and now I'm going to go read this so that I can think about all this arguing you're doing. But I do feel like, Andrew, you're making a good point there. That deviation probably was a good choice for the film. And actually, I saw something, it might have been in one of the resources that we were looking at as we prepared for today, that was mentioning how both of these characters are very strong personalities, and the movie does a really good job of, like, each of those strong, big personalities, these kind of heightened characters, are equally matched, equally weighted throughout the film, which can be really hard to do, having kind of a two leads, two key characters. And I think that's the thing about the film, right? The film is positioning both of them with equal weight. So then you kind of need Mozart to have some layers. But it's interesting what you're saying. That's not what the stage production was doing. The stage production was really from Salieri's point of view, in which case, of course, Mozart can't really have layers. Like, he doesn't see him with layers. He sees him as this annoying guy, and I'm the center of my own story. I'm the main character, and he is annoying, right? So
yeah, and the layers come in, it's still in the stage version, but in a different way. That it's that he depicts, or he has this genius gravitas to the music he composes and the occasional monologue he does, but that he's still the silly person on the way. And that to me, I find that so much more infuriating in the best possible way, being in Salieri's perspective, is that I want to think that you are great or worthy of the work that you put out as a person, but you aren't.
You are not.
And that just, that makes it so much more frustrating. I love that performance because it gets under my skin the way that I really feel like it's supposed to. And it just really gets what at least the play, maybe not the movie, but the play is all about.
Love it. Well, let's dive into our favorite production or design element of the film. We all kind of touched on it a bit in our initial thoughts, but Andrew, what is your favorite production or design element?
You know what? I know I talked about the editing before, but I really like, and this is kind of a subset of editing, but I really liked the colors of this movie. I thought it was really interesting because, again, I'm comparing everything to the National Theatre, but it was really fun to watch just the contrast as we get through the movie from like this like upper class stark white, no colors, kind of just like not plain, but like very proper kind of light coloring into like Mozart's world as he gets more rich, more saturated, more yellow, more warm, especially as we move into like I don't know what to call it. I'm going to call it the common opera, even though that's not quite the word for it. But moving into that,
the vaudeville, is that what?
Yes, the vaudeville. Thank you.
Okay.
As we move into the vaudeville and seeing that performance, so I really liked that. I think that was something that stood out for me immediately watching the film. I was just kind of like, everything is so sanitary, and then we got into something completely different. For both characters live in different worlds, and it's colored in a different way, and it just kind of like it popped out to me as something that I really enjoyed. Like I could talk about the music and the costumes and all that stuff, but like the immediate thing that struck me, because the stage versions are so full of both costume and music, was just the coloring of the movie. So for me, I took to that.
Love that. Sarah?
Well, I am going to talk a little bit about the music and the costumes, but it was two specific things, really. It was the editing of the music, and you touched on editing a little bit too, Andrew. I mean, there's a reason it won an Oscar for sound mixing. It wasn't just the music and the production of the music, which of course was gorgeous. It was the way that they would edit the music into the scenes to, the characters describing something, and then you start to hear the music and then it drags you back into a memory. Or the way the mother-in-law is yelling at him, and then all of a sudden he gets the idea and it becomes Queen of the Night. Like,
love it.
Brilliant. Just absolutely brilliant. I think I sort of forgot to mention this, but I think this is also why it feels like a movie like nothing I've ever seen, because the way the music evoked the memories that they were talking about, the way that it gave you an insight into an idea of how did maybe Mozart come up with these pieces. Like, what an interesting concept. It's so cool. And then I just also have to give a secondary shout out to Mozart's wigs, because I loved them.
If only he had 3 heads.
If only he had
If
3
only.
heads. And I felt like it feels like kind of a silly thing to bring up, but I just felt like there were so many. They were all hilarious. And they became such an interesting character study in the way, how does he present to the world? And what is this kind of eccentric persona that he embodies, especially in public? But then we also got to see all these scenes where he didn't have a wig on and it was just his hair. And there was almost a vulnerability to that, seeing him at home without his wig. But then his own hair would get crazier and crazier as he was kind of spiraling out of control. And I just thought that the juxtaposition of his wigs, his own hair, the way that they, not just the wig, but the way they chose, when does he have a wig on and when doesn't he? And what is that moment? I just thought that was also really brilliant.
I love it. Ryan?
Yeah, so I felt like this was a cheat going in, but since you both brought it up anyway, I want to just shout out the film editing, because, and yeah, a big part of it is, Sarah, what you were talking about with the way the music is woven in. And like the way that every time, especially Salieri and Mozart, they see sheet music, the music plays. And then the great scene when he meets Mozart for the first time and he sees it and he's narrating to the priest, and then there was an oboe and the rusty squeeze box. And then when somebody takes the sheet music away, oh, sorry, excuse me, and it just cuts instantly. It's like, yeah, it's really just like playing with the audio and the visual so well. And like, so that's a big part. And I think that's kind of the showiest thing in here about the editing. But there's just so much here. Like I said, Miloš Forman is just such a brilliant visual, just technical filmmaker. One of my favorite moments in this whole movie is what I think is just such a brilliant kind of David Lean style cut of when he gets married to Stanzi, and he writes the letter to his father kind of saying, I'm sorry, I got married without your blessing, but you told me to, commit myself to Vienna. So that's what I'm doing. And then his father crumples up the letter, and then we cut to the hunting party, and all the stags react to the sound of the letter crumpling from the previous shot and then get startled and run away. I was just like, that's like the literal match cut from Lawrence of Arabia in terms of just like brilliant one moment to the next. There's so many things that you could, like I said, you could just pick out any individual moment from this movie and there's something visually or musically interesting happening here. And it's a simple one that really kind of just perked my notice up very early on. It's also in the scene where right before Salieri meets Mozart or eavesdrops on him and Stanzi having their little backwards flirtation thing. But it's that he notices that there's the big buffet in the room and he wants to go in, but then there's all these people in the room. So he lets them all out the door, and then the door closes. And then we have just a shot of the door, and then we see the knob turn from the other side and comes in. Like, that could have just been an easy shot, reverse shot type edit, but the fact that they lingered on there and let the doorknob tell the story is just, there's so much brilliant attention to detail and everything here, and I just love it so much. I can't not shout out the editing in this movie because it is just such a fundamental part of why it's so great.
Love it. I'm giving my shout out to the music of the film because I don't know if any of you have looked at the track list, but the entire film score is Mozart.
That makes sense.
There is, like, obviously Salieri has
tracks.
a few incidental moments where he plays some of his own, but the
Sure.
entire film score is done by using Mozart's music, and it was conducted and supervised by Neville Marner, and he actually agreed to do the film on the condition that they use Mozart's music, but it is unchanged. He will not alter any of Mozart's music.
You can't change a single note, just like Mozart when he's writing.
Exactly. He did not change a single note. So what we are hearing is Mozart's music. And the fact they found, through all his different compositions, they found the perfect pieces to reflect the various moments. Like the fact that after Salieri has attempted to complete suicide and they're dragging him through the streets, and of course, what does he hear but Mozart playing just to torment the man further, you know? And I mean, one of my favorite parts of dialogue is do you know this piece? And he's playing his own, and Priest goes, no, that one. He goes, how about this one? And he plays the Mozart piece. And the guy goes, yes, you wrote that. He goes, no,
that was Mozart.
That was Mozart, right? Like, it's just so great. And the fact we talked about that big climactic scene of the Requiem being completed between Salieri and Mozart just shows just how integral the music is to this and how much it plays off one another. And the fact that they made the choice to not include any of Salieri's music in the film score, but purposely made it all Mozart, just further twists the knife into the Salieri character that in a film that's supposed to be his big story about how I was wronged, how I was cursed with mediocrity. The fact throughout the whole film, it's just Mozart, Mozart, Mozart. And it's all the music we know. And that's where you realize, I know that tune. And you go,
that was Mozart.
Right. That was Mozart. Like, everybody knows it's Mozart. And it is dry. And it's like, I can understand why this would drive Salieri nuts. And he's telling his life story, but the music of Mozart is the one that is perpetually hitting him throughout the entire film. It's perfect. It's such a great choice. Because they could have made other music. They could have done like we'll compose our own that's inspired by Mozart. But the fact that this Marner was very big on, he's like, no, I will not. I will only do this if we use Mozart's music and you allow me not to change anything. I will conduct
even if there's too many notes.
Even if there's too many notes, Ryan?
Which notes specifically?
Yes.
That is my favorite dialogue.
It's such a good line.
It's such a good line.
And I mean, the music is, the fact that we get the whole ballet sequence where, I audibly gasped when what's his name comes and rips the score apart. And my heart just went, oh, no, you can't
How dare you?
Yeah, in my head, I was like, he's not going to rip it out, is he? No, he's just going to be like, you can't do it. Nope, he's ripping it. Okay.
But then the fact that Mozart sticks it to them by doing fine, well, let's do it without the music. And everybody's like,
is it modern?
Modern? It's like, that's one of the greatest jokes of that whole movie. Is it modern? It's like, well, we can't have that.
Speaking of production elements, I feel like the writing, and especially the comic writing, also deserves a shout out, because so many of the moments we're highlighting right now were truly, like, I laughed out loud a lot. That was a moment. Just the fact that we actually got to watch the dancers dance to no music for honestly, it was hilarious. Like, there was so many times I actually laughed right out loud, which is not what I would have expected going into this dramatic film.
Yes.
So I feel like I'm just throwing in an extra shout out there for the writing.
Yeah.
Yes. The writing and the music. Once again, there's a great example of John Williams every year does this Hollywood Bowl concert. And for his 90th, Spielberg came and was like a co-host of the night. And he talked about how unsuccessful he would have been if he had not had John Williams by his side to help score his films. And he goes, here's a good example. So he takes the scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark where Indiana Jones is doing the truck chase. And he goes, here's a version of it without the music. And the 10 minutes go by and he goes, now wasn't that a boring piece of shit? And then he goes, now watch it. And now he goes, John, play it. And sure enough, they do the whole scene again with the music. And it's like, it comes to life. And that's the same thing when you're watching those dancers dance. It's like, the music is essential. That's why people like John Williams and Mozart and Beethoven and all these great composers throughout the ages have had such a resonance with us. It's because music feeds the soul. It tells you so much without actually having to tell you anything. You can just sit back and listen and go, Of course, that is a marriage dance ballet. Of course, it is, right? Like, or of course, that is the sound that happens when Star Wars opens and we enter into a galaxy far, far away. Like, that's the power of music. And that's why when you watch Mozart at the end, we'll get into his funeral, because I do have notes on that when we get into historical accuracy. But the fact we see him thrown into a common grave with other bodies and have lie thrown on him. And it's like, for a man who created such profound music to be reduced to what we see is like almost like a pauper's grave, just breaks your heart. And this film would not be what it is without that perpetual Mozart music being used, once again, to illustrate Salieri frustration, but also to give us that anchor point, because not everybody knows classical music, but we all have heard Mozart's songs, whether it's the Papageno melody, the Papageno, you know, like the thing that he's doing with the dun 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 with the bells, you know, or the Queen of the Night scene. Like, that's still one of my favorites. Of she just opens her mouth and the Queen of the Night's aria comes bursting out. It's perfect. It's perfect. You know, it's great. So yes, the music gets a shout out for me, because it's so essential to what makes this film work. And as a film all about classical music composers, if you did not get this part right, the film would have fallen apart before it even got out of the starting block, you know? So there we go. All right. So now let's get into, based on your familiarity with Shaffer's original play, how would you appraise the film adaptation of his work? Because Shaffer wrote both the play and the screenplay. So he adapted his own work for film. And if you're not familiar with the original play, does viewing this film make you want to read or watch this play more? Andrew, as our referee who has seen both, where do you stand?
Ooh, you see, this was such like a big question for me, especially kind of going like, it can't be that different. And it really was. But what a privilege it must have been for Shaffer to go, oh, I get to do both? Amazing. Because usually there's a lot of instances where the playwright is not the screenplay author. So amazing. I view this movie as a standalone, quite honestly. I've been comparing them the whole time we've been talking, but that is to say that like they're so different in my head that I can't go one came from the other. I just kind of have to go, these are two separate entities, and watch both, because they are both such different journeys and take such different perspectives, as we alluded to earlier, and both equally enjoyable, really, because they demand attention in such different ways. And the acting and the composition of both works, I say acting because of the National Theatre version, but the way they're written are so different, and you need to see both to get this idea of like what Shaffer did for both, I think.
Yeah. Ryan?
Yeah.
As a man of adaptation, would these two make it onto your syllabus?
Well, again, my syllabi as a theater scholar probably wouldn't necessarily talk about the film adaptation in the same way that it would if it was like a play based on some source. But yeah, I have to agree with Andrew with what you're saying, that I do see them as very separate entities, but knowing that one is an adaptation of the other, I think does enrich the way we can view some of the decisions that went into it. I guess the two big ones that are worth unpacking in some detail is the framing device, which I've already given a shout out to the actor who plays the priest. And of course, the whole plot to kill Mozart, which we'll talk in just a second. Let's start with the framing device, because these are, there's a lot of differences between the two works, but I think these are the two that really are probably the most fundamental changes. The framing device, I think, is a brilliant solution to a problem that probably shouldn't exist, but does, and it comes down to the fact that film has a very complicated relationship to the fourth wall in a way that theater doesn't. You'd think, because theater sort of invented the concept of the fourth wall as literally what's dividing the audience and the stage. But by the time of the 1980s, we'd had enough meta-theatrical things that there was no problem just writing Salieri monologuing his story to the audience and just going back and forth between living in that story and then just turning and as an aside and telling the audience. Even though I say this is a problem that maybe shouldn't exist but does, even though we can probably think of any number of films that just do that, break the fourth wall. well, Fiddler on the Roof for one. Like, I know, speaking of problematic people, but Woody Allen very famously did this a lot. We have things like Deadpool and Fleabag now that gets, but those things, they get so much, in my mind, undeserved praise just for simply breaking the fourth wall, when like this shouldn't be such a thing that you can just so easily impress people with by doing. But it's a testament to how rigid this wall is, that we treat it as this sacred convention that can get a laugh just for breaking it, when, you know, we should maybe think about what is the relationship between the art and the audience in these different ways. So regardless of whether or not this should be a separation, it is, and film has tried different ways of circumventing it. But I think the brilliant solution that this film and many other adaptations of things have done is what I have in the past called the Salieri principle of, if, you know, have a play or something that's, you know, where just a character is narrating to the audience, give them someone to narrate to. You have to just invent a character to just put in the scene, and then that is the way that you can still have the narration without breaking the fourth wall. Create like an audience surrogate character who this needs to be told to. But why I think it's so great is the decision to make that audience surrogate character a priest, which isn't just like really fitting that he feels guilty for possibly having killed or led to the death of Mozart and needs to confess to someone, but that it fits so well with the religious themes of the piece. And the moment that really hammers this home is at the very beginning, when the confessor says, God loves all of his children equally. And Salieri perks up his ears and says, does he now? Or I might be paraphrasing the exact phrasing, but it's having him talk to a representative of religious authority while telling the story about how God has forsaken him and the great crime against God that he does in retribution really just works so well. And I shouted out the actor who played the priest earlier because we get to see so much of the journey through his eyes, and he just adds this whole other dimension that maybe is representing what we, the audience, are supposed to go through. But it's kind of this extra commentary track on the action that we don't necessarily get if we have to just hear the monologue being told to us and have to think, how am I reacting to this? We maybe don't agree with the priest in every moment, and, oh, you're making a stern face, now you're making a pouty face, now you're laughing. But we get to kind of follow along somebody else who adds this thematic weight to it. So I love that as a solution to something that doesn't have to be a problem, but is. Now, the other thing I guess we have to talk about with the adaptation is the plot to kill Mozart, because that isn't in the original. The whole third act of dressing up like the stone guest from Don Giovanni and commissioning him to write his own funeral march so you can kill him and steal it and play it at his funeral. None of that is in the play.
No.
Which is
it's all about the magic flute.
Yeah, and the Freemasons and all of that and stuff, which is completely gone from this. Yes. Which I feel like people would be pissed about this if somebody else had written the screenplay and then done such a big departure like this. But, you know, it kind of gets the author seal of approval, goodwill, because Shaffer himself wrote it. And he's already playing fast and loose with the history anyway. So whether I do this fast and loose version or this fast and loose version, it doesn't really matter. But it is just such an intense, dramatic setup of this chess game that Salieri is playing off the fact that if I wear this particular costume, I know that I'm going to have Mozart think it's an apparition of his father in a way that nobody else does because they just watched Don Giovanni and didn't read the subtext because they didn't happen to be at that party where he was wearing a similar costume. And then kind of leading that up to just that scene that we've all talked about at the end where they're writing the Requiem together. It's such a high stakes, dramatic, intense sequence. And the fact, okay, there's one little snippet of a scene in there that I don't like, and that's Stanzi at this like fancy ball where she's like, I need to go back to my husband.
Yeah, it's just such a
spa. Yeah, she's at the spa, but she's at a ball and she's talking to this guy, and we have no background for where she is right now, but she's just like, I feel wrong. I have to see my husband. I feel like there was maybe something on the cutting room floor that even in the director's cut didn't quite make it. But while I don't like that, what I love is that we constantly cut back to her in the carriage on her way, because that's creating this ticking clock. And we're watching this being like, oh no, she's going to come. She's going to ruin Salieri's plan. Wait, do I want Salieri's plan to succeed? He's going to kill Mozart. Oh my God, so many conflicting feelings. they have just created so much drama out of the situation that just works so well. So is it faithful to the play? No, but the play isn't faithful to reality, and fidelity doesn't have to be a standard we judge us by. Is it interesting? Does it engage us? And yes, it unequivocally does. So I love this as an adaptation, and I love the way that it has departed from its source to be genuinely an adaptation of it.
For sure. Sarah, as someone who has not read the play, what does all this discussion do for you? Does it really intrigue you to go out and seek out the play now?
It definitely does, especially now hearing some detail about how the movie differs so much from the play. I was already going to go and read it, but now I'm definitely going to read it. I think so many of the things that stood out to me in the film were things that are filmic in nature, the editing of the music and the scale of the production, all of these things. So I would be really interested to go watch a production, read the play, read the source material, and try to picture, like, is it as powerful? My question before hearing you all talk about it was, is it as powerful on stage as it is on film? But now I'm hearing that it is, because we have such like heated debate on some great elements from the stage production. So I'm just fascinated by that, and I'm curious now what made Shaffer decide to make the changes for the film. You know, we often watch things that are adaptations from books, from other things where they've made changes, and sometimes you can speculate as to why, or oh, well, if they put all the details in from Harry Potter into the movies, they'd be like 7 hours long. Obviously, they had to cut
I would watch that 7-hour cut.
I would watch that 7 hours. But this, I'm intrigued, because as you say, if even the play is not based on reality, so he already created a fictional, historical fiction sort of version. Why did he decide that wasn't going to work on film? Or did he just have something, he just was like, oh, I have another idea, let's try this one? Or was there something about that he didn't think was going to work and it needed this other twist? I don't know. I'm fascinated and would love to read it.
Yeah. I mean, so I've had such an interesting relationship with this whole play film dynamic, because I had watched clips of the film for many years. I never actually watched it all the way through. It was one of those ones that I had watched clips of. Like, I knew the very famous climax scene of the film with the two of them composing. And then our wonderful friends at Talk is Free Theater did a production of Amadeus. And I vividly remember getting to the end of the play and going, wait a minute, where's the big composition scene? They left that out. Instead we get this kind of very wordy debate between Salieri and Mozart that I'm like, didn't quite hit the way. Watching these two men go at it with each other composition-wise at the end, where you see the two men finally come together in some way and unite it, even though it's all doing a very dark, evil plan at Salieri's, you know. It's one of those things where on stage, yes, you get into the whole plot of the Freemasons and the politics of him doing the magic flute, and they say don't do it, and loses his backing, and like it just gets a little too, I don't want to say convoluted, but it gets a little
esoteric, I think is the word you're looking for.
Thank you. It gets a little messy, a little esoteric. And I think Shaffer was, once again, because just like what happened with West Side Story, with what happened with Doubt, I think August Wilson also rewrote August Osage County.
August Wilson did not write August Osage County. You're thinking of Tracy Letts. Yeah.
Sorry, Tracy Letts. I think Tracy Letts also did the screenplay for August Osage County. So one of those things where a lot of these playwrights and composers who come back to their work later on say, oh, and also Fiddler on the Roof. Joseph Stein wrote both the stage show as well as the film screenplay. And one of the things they talk about is that after you watch the show a number of times and you open the theater up to it and you see it, you're, as an artist, nothing ever stays frozen. You're always adjusting lyrics or wanting to update things. And sometimes you can. Sometimes there are shows that allow you to kind of come back in and go, oh, let's tweak that a bit. Let's change that a bit. And sometimes you can't. Like once the show opens, there are some people who go, it's frozen. It is what it is. This is the published version of the play. And I think Shaffer really took this opportunity to go, how can I make this better? How can I make this a much more dynamic story? And arguably, I actually prefer the film to the play because of the ending. The stage show ending of, once again, because of the way they write Mozart in the play, where he gets very annoying to the point where I'm like, just die, versus this where I'm like, the tragedy of losing the genius, because you're watching this man who has all this music in his head, and he's going so fast, and you realize how much brain power, how much genius this man truly was, where he could hear it all in his head and go, I know it, but I can't write it anymore. I've lost my ability because this man is killing me without me really realizing it's him. You know, now he's here by my bedside doing that. There's just so much more poetic justice and so much more. It's simplified, but packs so much more of a punch that I go, yes, it's simplified, but it hits me so much harder than watching these two composers debate on stage at the end, where I'm like, okay, we're debating again. And like, all right, here we go. And once again, the writing's beautiful. Peter Shaffer did a beautiful job writing that ending for the play, but I think he just took this opportunity to go, you can't just have characters debating like in a room as one of them is dying. It just doesn't electrify the scene as it should on film. It's like reading the ending of the Harry Potter book, for example, when Harry Potter and Voldemort are lining up against each other to do that final, what do you call it, that gunsling room where they pull the wands and shoot at each other and the spells ricochet and it all goes kaboom, you know? Like on the page, Harry Potter monologues about, Tom, you must realize your heirs of your ways. You must realize the one never truly belonged to you. And it's a long kind of drawn up monologue and they're circling each other. And, you know, on paper it works because it's all the writing. It all is just writing that you go, yes, it's dramatic. And part of me wishes we had more dialogue in the final battle between Tom and Voldemort on film or Harry and Voldemort on film, because it doesn't quite pack the same punch and they leave a lot of loose threads on the cutting room floor. But on film, they make it into this dynamic chase through the castle. And, you know, they're chasing each other, they're going all over, and then they hit each other with the spells and it all ends, you know, very dramatically. And it's the same thing there, where you kind of have to look at it and go, what's going to work on one spectrum may not always work on the other spectrum. But I think I would absolutely prefer what Shaffer did on film compared to what he did on stage. I think it just worked so much better. That final ending scene is just so much more beautiful and poetic. It says so much about what's lost by these two great composers warring with each other versus, you know, actually being a united front on some stuff. Because they actually agree on music. But because of who Mozart is, Salieri can't get over it and can't get out of his own way. And go, instead of me being your collaborator, I'm going to be your enemy. And it's like, and just the tragedy of that final scene hits so much harder when it's all just about the genius that's being lost as you see the life fading from him as he's trying to write that Requiem. It's just so good. So good. Andrew and Ryan, I see you both wanting to chime in a bit. Who wants to go first?
I don't really have anything.
Okay.
I just wanted to chime in a little bit and say, like, again, as you say, one medium doesn't necessarily play to the other. The play seems to me, and this is up for debate by any means, the play seems to me more of a monologue. And that would never have translated on screen. No. It would have put the audience to sleep at 3 hours in a director's cut.
Yes.
So yeah, I absolutely agree. But I think they work in their own mediums, but I can see why you favor one over the other because of the way they're delivered. Yeah.
I guess something that I may even just add, it's not a refutation of anything you've said, Matt, but it's just, we've talked a lot about the medium and, film and theater are so different. And while that's true, and I think, Andrew, you're absolutely right, that, a monologue like what we get in the play wouldn't translate to film very well. There's also just a lot of little things in this that are completely irrespective of the medium that are just, I think, improved in the movie. Like the scene, for example, where Salieri wrote the piece of music that is used to introduce Mozart, and then Mozart makes it better by replaying it from memory and does his little improvements. In the play, it's only the two of them on stage during that, and we have the moment of, Salieri realizing, you're making it better, and I'm alone with these thoughts, thinking that. But in the movie, it's done in front of an audience. It adds the even more humiliation to that. It's not just me realizing you're better. It's, do they realize you're better too?
Yes.
And that's bigger. Yeah, and that's not something that you couldn't have done in the stage version. But I think Shaffer realized that, this is just something I can add to this moment. I think it's just the benefit of time. Writing one after the other, you come up with different ideas, like was sort of brought up earlier. And there's just a lot of little ways that the benefit of that time really did benefit the script.
Yep. Agreed. All right. Next question. Another topic Ryan and I duked it out on a bit last time. which is, does this film offer a good historical biographical portrait of Mozart and or Salieri? How do we grapple with the ethical complications of where the history has been altered for the sake of drama? Ryan, where do you stand on this?
My position on this has not changed since we did that other panel about like 2 years ago now, I think.
Almost 2 years ago?
Yeah, we're actually, wow. But yeah, I don't necessarily want to unpack it too much here. I would encourage people to check that out. I guess for the benefit of anyone who's not going to check that out, or Sarah, since you were not present for that conversation, I strongly believe that it's called historical fiction for a reason. And that as soon as you do create the veneer of fiction, simply by virtue of the fact that this is not a documentary, it's not a verbatim play where everything that is said are things that were on the record put forward by these two people. The author is having to come up with things for these people to say, and therefore it must be fiction by default. And therefore, once it's already fiction, you have the poetic license to change it however you see fit. The fact that it has a historical referent does not negate the fictionality of it. Mm-hmm. It maybe qualifies the way people will receive it, but I personally think the onus is on the audience to not treat works of fiction, even historical fiction, as their personal basis for non-fictional knowledge. You can't just watch this movie and be like, I know everything about Mozart, and I'm going to bring it up at cocktail parties. Corroborate that knowledge with research, and you'll find that some things are accurate and some things aren't, but until you've done that research, you can't know for sure, and you shouldn't blame a filmmaker or a screenwriter or a playwright for misleading you. The poet affirmeth nothing and therefore never lieth, to quote Sir Philip Sidney. And that is how I feel about this. I have thought some more, Mac, in these intervening 2 years about some of the points you've raised about the material consequences that the ethics of this maybe bring up for Salieri's descendants, if he even had any. I know he wasn't actually celibate in real life, so...
He was not, no.
Did he have children, to our knowledge? I don't recall. I never looked this up.
I shall look that up.
Look it up now. Cool. Do it. Well, while you're looking that up, I'll say, yes, I would feel bad if Peter Shaffer's character assassination of Salieri, and that's what it is a character assassination. Mm-hmm. Because, as by all accounts, Salieri was not malicious towards Mozart. He didn't plot to murder him. I understand the history of how that came about for a variety of complicated reasons that actually weren't even invented by Shaffer himself. He was playing upon a lot of rumors that existed at the time and that were already dramatized by authors like Pushkin. But I still think what the play does so well, and I feel like I made a version of this point last time too, is that it's commenting on the fact that we don't remember Salieri in his own right. That the only thing, even prior to this play, that he was known for is, oh yeah, isn't he the guy that maybe killed Mozart? that was the basis of his reputation. And the play does more on this than the film does, but it actually creates the idea that Salieri invented the rumor himself. And they kind of play with it a little bit more wink and nudge in the movie, but it's a lot more prominent in the play. That if I can't be remembered to be a great composer, I'll at least be remembered for this. But I like the way that, you could just make a straightforward version of the history where Salieri was a nice, good chap who had Mozart's best interest in mind, and then it would be so boring. And yeah, I guess the only alternative ethically to that I could think of, if we want to make an interesting version like this that doesn't slander the name of this real person, is to invent a fictional composer to take the Salieri role. Let's call him John. At the end of the day, though, John is still Salieri. The reason to invent a character like John is to play with the fact that there was a rival composer at the time who is speculated to have killed Mozart. Yeah. So even inventing a new person, maybe your average film or play goer wouldn't do the research to even know who is this John inspired by, but it doesn't actually decouple them the way that you would hope something like that does. So I think in order to play with the idea that this was a real person whose name has been slandered by history, you kind of have to slander that name a little further. But in doing so, they create this nuanced portrait of the patron saint of mediocrity. And can't we all sort of relate to him? I relate to Salieri so much more than I relate to Mozart, because I don't feel like I'm just this, effortless, gifted, brilliant person who can just come up with masterworks without even trying it, without needing to edit. I feel like Salieri so often when I see one of my peers succeed more than me. I don't want to kill them, thankfully, but get it. I think that even if it is a slanderous portrait, it's a very human portrait that we can all kind of grapple with our own imposter syndrome and inferiority when we look at him. He is a mirror that reflects us, more so than he is a mirror that reflects the real historical Salieri.
Well, there's a lot there, Ryan.
You can go next, Mac. Agree, disagree? Has your opinion changed in 2 years?
So first of all, with my quick deep dive on the internets about Salieri, he was married and divorced, apparently.
Okay.
Apparently, there are no living descendants of him. Only Clara and whatever her husband's name is, Schumann, have 8 living descendants from their children.
Oh.
But that's it. Apparently, there are no currently living descendants that we know of Salieri's.
Well,
Anyway,
that helps
that
mitigate
does
some
help.
of these ethical consequences.
That does. However, as Ryan said, is on the audience to do their research. And I do agree. But having known many general audience members, including people like my parents, who have no desire to go and read up on the history of Mozart and Salieri, like, not that they take it verbatim because I've told them this is not accurate, but there are many people in the world who would take a lot of this rumor and conjecture verbatim. And so the fact that this film is labeled as a period biographical drama,
It's only labeled as such on Wikipedia. The movie itself does not call itself that. So if you're already on Wikipedia, you can read a little further down the page to see where things have changed.
One would hope, but the fact that people don't like there's been a lot of debate since the latest season of The Crown came out, for example, about should there be a disclaimer at the beginning that says this is a work of historical fiction. We are inspired by certain historical events that we know take place. But we don't know what was said between Charles and Diana on their anniversary boat, nor do we know what is said between Philip, the Queen Mother, and the Queen on their way to her Annus Horribilis speech. So I mean, me personally, me being a critical thinker, of course this is fictionalized conversations. We do not know what was said behind closed doors, but there are many people in the world who do not have that critical thinking bone within them and will take what is said on the TV show or on a film as historical fact. Like, I know my grades in history class showed that Kate Blanchett Elizabeth films, and those are incredibly historically inaccurate. People were like, that's it. That's Elizabeth.
But Jeremy Irons, though, chewing the scenery. Come on.
Right? Exactly. Or what's his name? Sir Richard Attenborough. In the first one, it's like playing Lord Robert Cecil. It's like, no. This is not. Elizabeth did not perform a Godfather coup, like with all the Catholics at the end of the movie. That is not what happened. It's like, but like people take that as fact. So for me, I'm like, I think any type of, because there's always the based on a true story or inspired by events. But people don't know the difference of that. I personally said just like there should be a director's note at the beginning of your theater program that says, this is a work of fiction based on rumors, and a rumor that Salieri put out to kind of bolster his own name potentially. Like people need, I think sometimes people need a bit more of a prompt nowadays, because unfortunately the world has gotten so chaotic, so busy, that nobody has enough time in the world to sit at home unless you're really interested in classical music history or Elizabethan history, or like even some of the ways like Saving Private Ryan. People just assume that final tank battle took place. No, that's a fictional town. They made that up. The only historical part of that whole movie that's accurate is D-Day. And then the rest of the 90 minutes are historical fiction, So it's one of those things where it's like, there should be a little disclaimer at the beginning that says, this is a work of historical fiction. Please view it as such. So it's kind of like just kills any type of people assuming that there is some now historical fact that they can trot out at a dinner party of, you know what I watched? Amadeus. And in that, Salieri really stuck it to Mozart in that one. You're like, oh, yes. It's like, no. Like, if you put the disclaimer on the front, just like we have a PG-13 disclaimer and like the FBI disclaimer that says "Do not pirate,"
Yeah.
There could be a little disclaimer at the beginning that says this is a work of historical fiction. Take it as such.
Mind if I pose you a question, Mac?
Fire away, Ryan. I love a good Ryan question.
And to Sarah and Andrew, feel free to jump in on this too. It's not just, but it's in response to what you're saying, Mac. And I agree. If I have no problem with those disclaimers, I think it's pretty easy to tell when something is a work of fiction versus a documentary, and I think that functionally does the same thing as a disclaimer. But if it will help increase literacy of truth claims to put that disclaimer at the beginning of anything until people have internalized this as a rule, fine. I don't have a problem with that. Here's my question. Now that we've determined there are no living descendants of Salieri.
Yes.
So what is the actual consequence of if somebody watches this movie, does not do any research, and assumes it is accurate? What is the problem? What is the actual consequence of that happening? They might make an ass of themselves at a dinner party. They might repeat something that they say is a fact, but actually is not. Explain to me what the actual issue is here.
For me, it's a slippery slope. Because you go, oh, there's no living descendants, it doesn't harm anybody. There are many films. Actually, do you know where the whole disclaimer thing at the end of a film comes from that says these are not based on real people, blah 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 blah, that comes up at the end of a film? Do you know where that came from?
Maybe at one point, but enlighten us all.
It comes from the descendants of Rasputin, because there was a historical epic film all about the Romanovs and the Rasputin family, because he had many children, because he was banging everybody. They even pickled his own penis there in Russia. You guys can go see it. It's a thing. I kid you not, it is a thing. But anyway,
this conversation was going towards Rasputin's penis, but continue.
Surprise.
Anyway, but the whole point is, his descendants came out and said, "You misrepresented my."
I agree. If there are descendants,
but my whole point is, because you can say, "Oh, there are no living descendants," we can do this. You're now potentially going to slide in to go, "Oh, there are some descendants, but they're distant related. This is 200 years ago." It's a slippery slope. I just think blanket term, no matter what, there should just be a simple disclaimer that says this is a work of fiction, because by letting certain things slide, everything can start to slide.
Well, everything can, but I think the descendants is like it doesn't have to be the rule or the only rule, but it's a way that we can conceptualize what an actual ethical consequence could be.
True. In
the absence of that, I don't actually see a big problem with someone making an ass of themselves at a dinner party. That just doesn't feel like a reason to. I'm not saying such a disclaimer would compromise art, but I think the slippery slope that I'm more afraid of is that people will take fear of these kinds of problems to limit their creativity and what they feel like they can do. Would you have been happy if Shaffer would have felt like, oh, I can't make my creative Mozart movie because people will get mad that I've changed the history? That's the slippery slope that I'm more afraid of. So I think there are reasons to set up rules, and laws like slander and libel exist to enforce those rules. But and again, no problem with those disclaimers. I just think there's probably better ways of teaching truth claim literacy. I don't think it'll limit
the creativity, though, because just because you identify something as historical fiction shouldn't prevent you from writing what you want. It's now just giving you more freedom to go, okay. Like the barriers are off. I'm now no longer restricted to write within the parameters of historical fact, because I put up my disclaimer saying I'm going into the realm of fiction. I can write whatever the heck I want. If I want Queen Elizabeth to show up and actually steer a flaming ship into those Spanish Armada, so damn be it, because
I would have loved if that movie ended that way. That would have been amazing.
Right?
It would have made grade 10 history so much more interesting.
It's historical fiction, put it up there that, say, hey, Braveheart actually survived his execution and it wasn't Robert the Bruce that led.
He survived his execution? What?
It wasn't him in the end. Surprise.
Okay.
It was a double, but because you put the historical fiction tag, you now can put whatever the heck you want in your film. I think it actually opens the door, because now you can go,
okay, hey. I will agree if all you're arguing is imposing that tag, then sure. open up that door. I worry more about people internalizing the problem of I, the creative artist of fiction, must follow history. And a lot of very boring writers do that. And that, to me, we have perfectly suitable non-fictional genres of storytelling, be it literary nonfiction or documentary filmmaking or documentary theater, that can do justice to that type of factually accurate storytelling. Again, a broken record here, but yes, if it will please you to give every work of historical fiction that little disclaimer,
I don't think you can hurt. I think it just clears
all right,
clears things out. Anyway, Ryan or Andrew, what do you think of this as our referee?
Yes.
First of all, Ryan, that all right? I felt that in my soul, and
yes.
I loved it. I mean, I think as the referee, I kind of see both points. I really kind of think that the danger is not necessarily from not clarifying that a work of fiction is history, but claiming that fiction is history. I think that, does that make sense? Yeah. I think it's more okay, great. Thank you. I think it's more dangerous to just say that, yep, this piece of fiction is true to the world and history. I think that's more dangerous than anything than not saying that fiction is fiction. I think film and plays, for me, should be regarded just as a blanket fiction until somebody says that it's not.
Otherwise, yeah.
So, but at the same time, is there harm in from the top going, this is a piece of fiction? No, I don't think so at all. But if somebody is not correcting that a piece of fiction is fiction, then there becomes a problem. So I see both points. I don't think creativity should be limited to the events of a historical event, but it should be clarified that a piece of creativity is a piece of creativity.
Yeah.
I think I said things that make sense.
You did.
Okay, great.
Good job.
All right, tag out.
All right. Sarah?
Honestly, I don't have much to add from that. That's kind of exactly what I thought too. I see both points. I don't have a problem with the fact that this movie took liberties with the history. I think a big part of that for me too is that Shaffer didn't come up with the rumors. The rumors existed at the time. So I actually think it's quite it actually is in a way truthful to the history, and that this rumor existed. So let's play with what might have caused that rumor and why. I feel like that's fine. I wouldn't have a problem with there being labels on work to make sure people understand it's fiction. I don't feel like that should be needed, but I think we're in a little bit of a strange world. There's a lot of fake news. This has become a thing recently that is a real issue. And so I think also with this film, it feels like obviously it's fiction. How could we not know it's fiction when we don't have recordings of what these people said to each other, versus something like The Crown that's so recent. I fell trap a little bit to thinking it was more accurate than it was, just because it's such current history that I was like, we must know this. They must have put this in the show for some reason. Why would they write something historically inaccurate while making it look true to it's The Crown is different than this show, right? The Crown is portrayed to be a little bit not documentary, but a little closer to documentary. So this is I'm just rambling, but I'm just thinking aloud that I feel like a piece like this, there's nothing wrong with making historical fiction as it is and being creative. I don't feel like it should necessarily need a label, but I do think that maybe in today's current climate it does. And I guess that's where I would leave it.
Wonderful. And once again, I would just say, as a film, I thoroughly enjoy it. It's funny, doing some research on this, one of the funniest things I found was the end of the film, in the sense of Mozart's funeral. So if you had to read historical accounts of that day, it actually was sunny.
How dare they make it raining?
It was not raining.
My God. I'm going to make an ass of myself at a dinner party and tell people it was raining that day. Wow.
But it's the bigger thing of where Mozart was buried. Mozart was not buried in a pauper's grave. He was given a common grave, but what that meant is we inter you in the ground in your own grave, but after 10 years, we will dig your body up remove your bones, and then reuse the plot of land. Because royalty had a proper grave that was assigned, designated to them, and nobody could ever touch that space again. A common grave was for people of elevated class who could afford to have their own plot, but for a limited period of time. So,
see, in terms of the visual symbolism of putting him in the pauper's grave, though, it would be kind of silly to be like, okay, we're going to put him in this grave and then cut to 10 years later. Okay, time to give him up. He wasn't royalty.
Yeah. It's like just the gravediggers from Hamlet going,
yeah.
You wouldn't believe who this guy was.
Right?
There's something elegantly efficient about, yes, changing that history to communicate very starkly with just your eyes without needing to kind of pull out a history book on the history of internment to explain why Mozart's historically accurate grave was still a cut below what somebody like the emperor might have had.
Once again, like, that's just something where it's like, as somebody who wouldn't know that history, you can now just assume Mozart's body ended up in some mass unmarked grave, versus in reality, he was given a proper funeral. And throughout Vienna and Salzburg, there were many tribute concerts done in and around his death. So, it wasn't just some neglected, nobody understood his music. It's like, no, people actually liked what he did. It was just, once again, for the sake of storytelling, it works great. But for someone who wouldn't know that, they would go leave the film assuming that Mozart's grave is now...
Well, but the point
who knows where he is?
Well, the point remains the same, that either way, he doesn't have a grave that you, fan of Mozart, can go visit. You can't kiss the glass like you can do with Oscar Wilde.
That's true.
And regardless of whether or not it's a pauper's grave or a common grave, doesn't change that fact, which is actually the thing that maybe somebody would care to be like, oh, where is Mozart buried? I want to visit him next time I'm in Vienna.
Not anymore.
You can't, but that's the same regardless of which kind of grave it is.
True, but once again, that is creative license, that if you label that as historical fiction, people will now go...
It is labeled as historical fiction, just minus the label, but yes.
Yes, either way, point being. All right, let's get to the next question, though, because speaking of artistic licenses, the film version we watched was a director's cut, which nowadays we associate with like a Peter Jackson 3-hour, 4+ hour epic extension of his film. This director's cut is like an additional 20 minutes, but an essential 20 minutes that can change a lot of perspectives in the film. So, in particular, there is a dynamic between Salieri and Costanza that is lost between the theatrical and extended cuts, among other changes as well, which we'll get into. But Sarah, for you, what did you think of the director's cut?
Yes, I have some strong feelings about this. And it's because I only had 2 small issues with the film, and both are kind of relevant to these director's cut scenes. The first is just that maybe it was a little long. And the only reason I noticed that was because there was a couple scenes that did feel a little redundant. Like sometimes I was like, I get the point that's being made. And then there was like another scene about that. So just in terms, I felt like it could have been a little more succinct, minus, for example, the scene where we figure out that Mozart has slept with the opera star that Salieri loves. We all understood the implication of that when they were on stage having the conversation. Maybe we didn't need the dressing room scene, right? So that's just like a matter of preference, maybe. I could have done without that second scene, because we got it as the audience, we understood. And sometimes subtlety is like a little more powerful. But this is where I have a strong feeling. I cannot believe that the scenes between Salieri and Constanzi were removed for theatrical cut, because that is like key to the plot. But the reason I have such strong feelings about it is because I do not think that scene should have been cut. It was also my least favorite scene. And so this is where I'm like, I was like conflicted, because the climax of the movie only makes sense when you have seen these scenes. Because why is Constanzi so hostile to Salieri at the end without knowing this history? So bizarre choice to me to take that out in the theatrical release. But also, I do feel like it is helpful to villainizing Salieri's character. If that is the point of the film, that is like a really key moment where we see that there's something rotten in him. Like that really ups his villainous nature by quite a few notches. And I feel like without that, he's not quite as bad a guy as it seems like we're supposed to think. So I do think that's important to both the climax of the movie, layering relationship in with Constanzi and Salieri. It's an interesting plot point that adds to to the character study of Salieri. So baffled as to why that would be removed. But I really hated the scene. And the reason is really that it reflected what I find is true in a lot of movies from this era in regards to its female characters. They tend to be quite one-dimensional, and I felt like this was one error the movie made in this spot. It was too easy for Constanzi to agree to sleep with him. I know that they were positing that they were very in debt, but like they weren't on the street. They were eating in every scene. Like they were not desperate. So it's hard for me to really believe that like she just jumped at this with only mild hesitation. And in the scene itself, she kind of just went for it and started taking her clothes off. Like it was a little, it didn't feel believable to me. And I found that, I felt like the scene needed to be in it. I thought the plot-wise, the scene was good. But if they were going to do it, I wanted them to do it better. And I wanted her to struggle more. Like, can I see it on her face that this is like breaking her to do it? Can I see there's some other reason why she's so desperate that she thinks this is what she has to do? I just needed to see a little bit more complexity or a little bit more nuance to the moment for it to make sense. But unfortunately, I was like physically rolling my eyes during that part because it was like a lot of movies that I watch from this era where the women are kind of there to cry a lot, bolster the man's storyline, and probably take their top off, like, which also to me was a little gratuitous and unnecessary, given that there's no other nudity in the film, and that just had to, like, you could, if you were going to do it that way, you also could have done it with a little more subtlety. So that left me not the happiest. And I just felt like, again, so that's why I was so conflicted and my feelings were so strong. So I was like, these scenes are key. I see where they're going with it. I would have got on that train if they could have just done it, making this woman like a real human, realistic woman with a three-dimensional character. And so, but that is a fact of a lot of 80s era and thereabouts style movies. So it's not unique to this film, but that's kind of that was like my one takeaway where I was like, you didn't quite get that one. But that's just me.
Yeah. Wonderful. Ryan?
Yeah, Sarah, I have to agree with everything you're saying. Because I agree, this scene feels so fundamental that it's baffling to me that I've only ever seen the director's cut of this. I think the original theatrical cut, ever since the director's cut came out, is hard to come by.
Very hard to come by. Not since the 90s.
Yeah,
I have the original theatrical cut.
Yeah, and it's baffling to me that the original audience just saw it without this scene that changes so much of the story. So I agree. I think it is fundamental. And I also completely agree that it is gratuitous and maybe unbelievable. And I think a big part of the reason is that Stanzi herself as a character is a problem. Just the way that she is depicted is a problem. And that is both in the original stage version and in the film. But in the film in particular, since that's what we're talking about here, with the actor who plays her, Elizabeth Berridge.
Who was a last-minute replacement.
Okay, right. Who was supposed to play her?
Hold on, I have her name. Hold on, give me a minute. Let me just get back to my Amadeus page.
Okay, while you're looking at that, I'll just say what I was going to say. She plays it. I don't know if this is necessarily her choice or a directing choice. Meg Tilly
was supposed to play the role, Canadian actress, but she blew out her Achilles tendon playing soccer on set in Prague with some children.
Wow.
What a drag. Okay.
And not knowing what that alternative performance would have looked like, so we can't do this comparison. But I do find Elizabeth Berridge, while she is very compelling and dynamic in the role, she's a manic pixie dream girl. But that is, she has a very childlike appearance and aura. And yeah, she plays the character as someone who you completely get why she has this good relationship with Mozart, because he's a man-child, she's a manic pixie dream girl. They're perfect for each other. But that is kind of, there's no way to slice it. She has this kind of flittiness to her. She doesn't, even though there is genuine depth and nuance to this character, she plays a lot of the moments in this very, oh, I'm just the girl one kind of way.
Yes.
And that is a problem, because like you could have easily fixed the scene that was cut in the theatrical version just by making her a little more revolted or hesitant. And part of me thinks that they were trying not necessarily to do that, but I think they realized that this was a problem and there were things in it that tried to do this. And one thing in particular, Sarah, you talked about how, why was she so quick to take this measure? They aren't that destitute in this moment. It's less maybe even because of the poverty, but an explanation that I think the script tries to present that is very, like, almost so subtle, blink and you miss it, is that when she shows up at Salieri's house the second time, and right before she starts getting undressed, she says, "My husband's at a concert tonight. He said I wouldn't enjoy it." And I think of that line and I'm like, this is, maybe she's a little pissed at him. And this is a bit of while this is something that will help his career, he probably wouldn't approve of the tactic she's taking to do it. And this could be a little bit of you think I don't care about music. You don't think I care about your career. Well, look what I'm willing to do. And in like that kind of, while she is very like way too smiley about what she's about to do, she kind of presents it as maybe she's into Salieri. Maybe this is something that she's like, well, I'm a married woman and I don't know how I feel about this, but you're a nice looking gargoyle of a man. Like, I'm kind of into this.
But thus posits the other thing I don't like about this era of movies is they always have some really young woman ridiculously attracted to some ancient man.
Exactly.
So if that is, so that could totally be an explanation. But I'm with you, and they didn't quite. They still didn't make it clear enough, and it's still ridiculous.
And I'm completely with you. That doesn't make it believable, but I can at least see efforts being made to make it work. But
there is
the other
scene before she goes to Salieri where Mozart's playing pool. It kind of tells her to fuck off, or she's like, no, represent your music. So the frustration,
and she's not just frustrated.
She is frustrated with her husband.
Yeah, so maybe
she is shown to be the pragmatic, smart one of when what's his name, Simon Callow's character says, "Yes, we'll give you half the house." She's like, "No, you pay us up front."
Oh, I didn't realize you brought your manager with you.
Yes, exactly. So she is a pragmatic businesswoman.
And thanks for bringing that up, Matt, because that is like another bit of the mounting evidence for why she might be so quick to take this measure beyond just we need the money. But the other thing that I kind of want to draw attention to is, because a lot of the conversation around this scene, should it be in there, is it okay that it was cut, is that it really does villainize Salieri to think that he is in a position where he's extorting sexual favors from his rival's wife, regardless of whether or not he goes through with it. And any way you slice it, whether you cut the scene or leave it in, he doesn't go through with it, but he still humiliates her in this horrible way. But the thing that I'm kind of interested in is, would he have gone through with it if she hadn't dropped the sheet music and then he got a glimpse of it and started hearing Mozart's music? Because the way it's framed, at least in the movie, less so in the play, but it really does seem like maybe he would have. But then it's almost like Mozart is watching me in this moment and no thank you, ring the bell. I don't know. I think that there's like a compelling argument to be made of, what is this something that he was interested in? Was all along this just a plan to humiliate her and get some petty revenge against Mozart that way? But I don't really think that tracks, because he ideally doesn't want Mozart to find out about this, because it only makes himself look bad.
Yes.
So I don't know. There's a lot of interesting things here. Overall, I think the director's cut is the better version, having not seen the other one, but just knowing what's been cut. I really like the two scenes with the dogs, the house with the dog guy.
Those are great.
Yeah, those aren't in the theatrical cut, and those are just fun scenes. I get why, if you were needing to cut this down for time under the original constrictions, not knowing that this is going to be one of the biggest movies ever, that you're like, I guess we can do away with these. The actor who plays the dog dad, I don't know what to call him otherwise, but the one who holds the dog, like he's just like a charismatic presence on stage or on screen. So there's a lot of great things about this director's cut. I'm glad it has become the definitive version, but I completely agree with you, Sarah. These are problems that are kind of difficult to solve, even if we maybe see gestures towards solving them in the pudding. I don't know.
Yes. Andrew, I see you nodding and pointing along. So where are you standing on this?
I agree. I think it's, in terms of director's cut versus theatrical cut, I think it's kind of like what Mozart said. What notes do you want me to remove? It has the exact amount of notes that it should have. So it boggles my mind, especially since it's the scene with Costanzi is in the staged version, the stage script that is in there. And I find it baffling as to why it was removed at all, because if anything,
studio interference is what Miloš Forman said. Was he was told you have to get at least 20 minutes out because it's a 3-hour long movie and we want more show times. So even back then, studios were pulling that shit.
I mean, but why that scene? Like, I mean, I get its problems.
Don Giovanni a little shorter.
Yeah, like, and honestly, yes, there was like plenty of scenes that I was like, there are parts that just don't add to the story as much as this part did. Does it have its problems? Absolutely. I was like, why is she so, like, as you pointed out, Ryan, I'm like, why is she so into this? I literally, like, as it was happening, I'm like, more clothes are coming off. What's happening? And I pulled up the script. I'm like, is this in the original? Did I just miss something? Because I was so confused. I'm like, what's happening? But like, it has its problems, but it serves the story. If you're going to cut anything, cut some of the performances. I'm sorry, Ryan, cut some of the priest. Like,
yeah, you can cut some of it, not all of it.
Yes, some of it. Don't cut all of it. I totally agree. But I don't.
We can cut the horse.
Go.
No, keep the horse. Here's the thing, though. So many of the stage, like opera and performance parts, those must have been so expensive to mount that there was probably mandated that, no, you can't cut any of this because we spent too much and wasted too much time doing this. To just have it on the cutting room floor would be heartbreaking. Yeah. So this scene that is so important to the plot, you know, had to bear that cross by, you know, dying for its sins, for the sins of over budgetness. Yeah.
That's fair, but then I'm still gonna say cut more of the priests.
Cut that priest.
Just cut him out of that. Like, and I'm not saying that the priest doesn't serve the story. I just don't think it's as important as the villainization of Salieri through this, like, this proposition. Because I always go, what's gonna happen? Oh no, he's like taking that descent. This is the first stop in his descent to hell. So the fact that like any scene of this, but especially that one for me, was cut is kind of like, it doesn't do the entirety of the film, the story justice. So yes, the theatrical cut, I'm glad it's gone.
All right. I'm going to disagree a bit. I know. So for me, once again, I've never seen the theatrical version. But from what I've read, the difference is that the Costanzi scene begins the same way, where she comes in, says, "Can you please help?" Then here's the music, and then he reads the music, and then he storms out. And then it's left vague of, does she sleep with him? Does she not sleep with him? It's kind of left up for grabs. But then we still get the next scene of him burning the crucifix.
Well, but sorry, just to chime in there, I don't think he propositions her.
No, he doesn't. No, so
yes.
No, so basically, there's no music gets frustrated and storms out.
Okay, so there's no ambiguity about whether or not she does or doesn't.
Sorry, yes, my bad. Yes. Sorry. My notes are misplaced here. Anyway.
No, just clarifying.
Thank you. Yes, clarifying. So anyway, my issue with the whole stripping and humiliation scene of Costanzi is, first of all, it's very unnecessary. Guys here said it is gratuitous nudity for the sake of, you know, showing off a young woman's breasts to the world. And also, in my opinion, over-vilifies Salieri. We already know what he's going to do, because he said, I'm going to kill Mozart. Well, he hasn't said I'm going to kill Mozart, but we know what's going to happen in this story. It's a well-known story. On top of that, we've seen him burn the crucifix. Like, I think there's enough villainous things he does that we don't need another scene of him now humiliating a woman. I think the fact that he storms out and leaves Costanzi without an answer and without helping her gives her more than enough ammo when she comes back to the dying Mozart and saying, "Get out of our house. Do not touch his music because you did not help us before." I think there's enough ammo there. That situation could have worked without it. I think there also is another Salieri scene that vilifies him too, which is where he goes to the emperor and says, Mozart is molesting young girls.
Which is also cut from the theatrical cut.
And I agree. I think both those situations should be cut, because if we're trying to balance the film, and also this is Salieri's perspective, having scenes in there that outwardly make him really villainous and like a cruel gargoyle of a man who's like pulling a bit of a Harvey Weinstein here, you know, to put it nicely, with what he's doing, because it's horrible. Like he is extorting sex for against this woman who does not want it. You know, I mean, she goes home and cries and is humiliated. It's one of those things where it's like not necessary. The guy doesn't need to be further vilified. This is already a character assassination, and he already kills Mozart at the end, as we see. He plays a very active hand in killing Mozart. Like, doesn't need more vilification to make him worse than he already is. He already is kind of the antagonist of his own film, protagonist, depending on how you view it. But it's like it's a little bit over the top in the sense of let's make him really bad. Let's make him try and sleep with Constanzi. Let's have him put a pedophile rumors against Mozart. It's like, okay, clearly we're really trying to hammer home this is not a good guy when we don't need that extreme to show what Salieri is capable of. I mean, the fact that he burns a crucifix back in like that already is like blasphemy to some people in the world who are very religious, who probably went and saw it and went, oh my God. I mean, my grandmother freaked out when he burned the crucifix because like, that's big. Like that's a huge no. You don't do that. You know, it's like, so I just think it wasn't necessary.
How did your grandmother feel about the scene with Constanzi?
Oh, she skipped that scene. I kid you not. She fast forwarded that scene. She just didn't care.
I mean, fair. Yeah.
She went, it's not necessary. Also, exactly. She didn't really care for it. She liked the music, didn't care for the nudity. You know, so it's one of those things where it's just sometimes cutting some things is not a bad thing. There are other scenes that I enjoyed, like the Mozart, Salieri, and Katerina dressing room scene. I enjoyed the dynamic of the three of them kind of batting it around with each other. The dog scenes. I love the begging scene when Mozart comes back to him and pleads for money, because that kind of harkens back to the scenes in the court in the play where Mozart's going around to different court people saying, I need help. And they go, all right, here, we'll give you some money. Then he goes, oh, great, I'm going to write about the Freemasons and piss you all off. You know, so there's a little bit of that of Mozart begging where I'm like, once again, that builds up the pity of this genius man who is reduced to begging on the street, you know, or like begging for work, begging for money. So I enjoy that scene. And it's a great bookend to the beginning of it where he storms off when he could have made money off these people. They were clearly very willing to pay him to teach their daughter, but he was a man-child and didn't look beyond his own ego at the time, you know? So I like those scenes. I think those scenes should have stayed in, but there are other scenes like the really vilification of Salieri that I'm like, I don't think we need to go this far into vilifying this man. This man already does enough to make him a bad guy in the audience's eyes without having to like show breasts of a very young actress. Like I think she was in her late teens, early 20s when she did this role. She was very young. Like she's 60 years old now. So if I look,
are we doing arithmetic? Andrew, you're while Mac is doing math. Andrew, you're making a lot of faces. I want to hear what you have to say.
I mean, well, no. First of all, I was like, oh no, she's that young. Oh, it's just I'm like Hollywood, wild place. But like, I wonder if, to your point where you're like, we don't need to over vilify Salieri. I almost want to argue
she was 22.
Still very young, but an adult.
Yeah, an adult. Yeah.
An adult, but very young adult. Like this was her first big.
If it was like late teens, I'd be like, all right, 22, still young, but anyway, muddy waters. But I wonder if the audience gets to see more of Salieri's fight with God through these acts. Because for me, it's like, especially through the stage version, he says, I'm fighting for this reason. I'm doing this for this reason, so that I think in the stage version, he sleeps with his pupil because he's like, forget Chase. Yes. Yeah, again, in the stage version, that's not in this version, but to the point I'm making, he like drops out of like all of his like charitable acts. He's like, forget charity. I would argue through seeing this scene with Constanzi sans nudity, it kind of gives this like insight into like, how is he waging this war? Not necessarily with Mozart, but with God. So for me, I wouldn't necessarily call it like an over vilification. I just call it, we're showing the war, in my opinion.
And something I would also add, Mac, you mentioned Harvey Weinstein, somebody who's only recently faced judgment for what they've done. So you're worried about over vilifying Salieri. The fact that he's extorting sexual favors from someone and the movie unambiguously treats that as a villainous act, there's something a little powerful in that. Because that was something that at this moment in
super
Hollywood,
fair.
and nobody would have batted an eye at happening behind closed doors in a producer's office. Nobody, like the men in power, a lot of people. Well, I know, but the fact that it's only very recently become treated as a problem, where it was just an open secret that a lot of people were okay with up until very recently. I think there is power in keeping a scene like this, of treating this person as a villain for doing so.
Fair.
That's super fair. Yeah.
Fair. I mean, I just go, it's okay. We can leave that on the floor. I don't think as much was lost. I think there's enough ammo with Costanzi and Salieri without the nudity.
To that point, I would agree that there could be enough ammo, but I think they would have had to radically rewrite that last scene just so she's not making callbacks to that previous encounter, to have her be like, when I wanted help from you, you turned me away, like put in lines that more directly address the way the situation has changed. But I have a feeling when that was already locked in and filmed, like well before they got the note that they needed to make cuts, and it was too big a change to just fix with ADR.
Yeah. Well, exactly. So there you go. All right, let's wrap it up with the final question. Would you recommend this film to others? Andrew,
can you imagine
where does
if I
this
said
film rank
no?
in your best picture rankings? And would you recommend it?
You know what? As someone who kind of is hit and miss with Oscar films, definitely. This one I was like, oh, it won the Oscar, and I kind of looked at it hesitantly. I'm like, all right, let's go to see what happens. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I would definitely recommend it, but I would still also, while recommending it, being all like, watch it and then watch the National Theatre version.
Which one should they watch first, Andrew? The play or the film? Because they are very radically different.
I'd say they came out, it was done play then movie, correct?
Correct.
Yes, it was a play
first. I would still do it in that order. Because especially to your point, Ryan, which brilliant point, that there's this maturity of the play through time and things got to fixed and enhanced. So for that reason, I think that, play then movie. Yeah.
Love it. Sarah?
I would definitely recommend it. Despite my vigorous complaint about that one part, I really loved it and really enjoyed it. And absolutely would recommend.
Love it. Ryan?
Of course, I would recommend it. I would agree with Andrew, you recommending both, and I would agree with the order. Even though that is a more recent stage production, then I would still say watch the play and then see what the movie did with the play. We said earlier, I forget who raised this point, that you don't really see movies like this anymore.
I said that.
Yes, you said it. And something I'll even add is you don't really see plays like this anymore.
No.
That the reason why we kind of have this association with movie based on play as this intimate, usually family drama, 3 or 4 characters, is because that's what theater has become. Not necessarily large-scale musical theater is a completely different animal, but serious dramas like what used to be this have, had their budgets slashed and have to get more and more economical and resourceful. And we tend to recognize a film as being based on a play, based on some superficial traits like that these days. But I think people who aren't theater folks like us might be surprised to learn that this was based on a play. And it makes for a very fun comparative exercise, but it's also just a great film in its own right that really is, cinema with a capital C, as we've talked about in so many different dimensions of this conversation. So, it's one of the great films of all time, in my opinion. It's a great adaptation of a great play. Everybody should check this out. It's awesome.
Yes. And I will fourth, once again, what everybody's saying. I absolutely recommend this film. I mean, it is one of my favorite Best Picture winners. It's right up there with West Side Story, The Godfather, Silence of the Lambs, Chicago, Return of the King.
You came with your list.
King's
Speech makes that list? What?
It really does. I mean, as somebody who grew up with a stutter, that film speaks to me on a whole lot of levels. And I don't like the fact people are like, oh, it's just a boring drama. It's like, no, it's a really good personalized historical drama of this time period. And this man's struggle.
You said something nice about Tom Hooper. That's amazing. I've never heard that come out of your mouth before.
You never will again. Anyway, so yes, but this is such a great Best Picture winner. Like, as I said at the beginning, this is what I picture as a Best Picture winner. Actually, I should say Titanic's on this list too. Titanic is on this list too, because it is one of my favorite films of all time. And also Best Picture winner. But, it's one of those great epic Oscar-winning films that just does so much. And as I'll repeat again, like it just matured the play. It took so many great elements and just matured them and made them more cinematic and really hits the mark. And I do agree. Go with the play first and then hit the film, because you can see the evolution and you can see the maturity of Shaffer writing these two composers, where he goes from kind of doing one where Mozart's a real pain in the ass and we're waiting for him to die, to one where now you kind of go, oh my God, I don't want him to hit him in the pauper's grave at the end. I really don't. I wanted him to live longer and compose more and mature and get out of his alcoholism, you know? Like, the plight of Mozart in this film is so much more tragic. But I think you need to see the play first to really appreciate what Tom Holtz brought to that role, to really turn your opinion around on this character. Because when you watch, once again, if I came the opposite way and watched Aidan Gillen first, I probably wouldn't have minded his performance so much.
Adam Gillen.
Adam Gillen.
We made this problem before. Adam Gillen is Carcetti and Littlefinger. I don't know if they're related.
Good point. Yeah, so Adam Gillen, I think if I hadn't seen Tom Holtz first and seen Adam first, I don't think I would have minded his performance was, because Tom Holtz did such a beautiful job of making me sympathize with this man-child. I really struggled going backwards. And the same thing with the composition scene at the end. The fact that it's not in the play, and if you know the film, you know it's there, and you go, what the heck am I watching at the end? Why am I getting all this political intrigue with the Freemasons and the magic flute? What the hell is this? Stuff, Shaffer, you know? So, yes, watch it, but watch the play first so you can further appreciate what this film graduated to and the work that Shaffer and Forman did to really elevate this piece from a play that is very kind of small, intimate, with a core group of people, to a full-on epic historical fiction piece, you know? So yeah, recommend it. Get out there and watch it. It's on streaming services, I'm sure. Get out there. It'll give you a new appreciation for classical music and opera, because those are music styles.
Specifically Mozart's.
Not Salieri's. That's
not Salieri.
Well, maybe we'll inspire you to seek out Salieri's music. That is what happened after this film came out, was people actually went back and rediscovered Salieri's compositions.
The same people who thought that he murdered Mozart?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, people were interested. They were like, what is his music? So there actually was a rise in Salieri concerts, like music concerts of his, as well as, like, back then it was records. They didn't have CDs yet. This was the 80s. So, you know, like records cassettes and tapes. Yeah. So, you know,
I will say it did make me appreciate opera more, because I love classical music, but I'm not a huge opera fan. But I enjoyed this so much. There's something always about watching people perform music that is just, it takes it to another level. So getting to watch actors portray these people singing these amazing pieces, but it really, if anyone was hesitant to watch it because they were like, oh, I don't know if I like classical, I don't know if I really like opera, I would say you will by the end of this.
You will. I mean, Mozart just describing the way everybody comes in on that octet just makes you go, ah. It's like listening to Sondheim to me. It's like the complexity the composer brought to that, and the fact you have Mozart describing it in such a beautiful way just makes you appreciate it that much more. So yes, watch it. There we go, everybody. So we will leave you here. We want to hear your thoughts on this, though. Who do you agree with more, me or Ryan? And you can answer the question, am I the Salieri or is Ryan the Salieri? Who is the Mozart in our dynamic duo? Let us know your fan casting.
Fan casting. That's one way of putting it.
And who would Andrew and Sarah be in our story?
As long as you don't say Constanzi.
No. I volunteer to be Constanzi.
Oh boy, Ryan. Get ready for some steamy scenes.
Yes, scenes that will be cut and kept in the vault for about a decade.
There we go. All right, so before we go, though, let's say where we can be found and followed. Sarah, where can people find and follow you?
You can find me on Instagram. I'm at heim.sarah.
Amazing. Andrew, where can people find and follow you in all your antics you get up to theatrically? Do you have any shows coming up we can go and see?
I don't have any shows coming up right now, but should that change, you'll find out about it on Instagram at andrew.s.powaru.
There you go. Wonderful. And Ryan, give us that classic Ryan Borochovitz send-off we all know and love so much.
Yeah.
That's not changed the last time we did Amadeus.
Has it not changed? I don't remember. Yeah, I'm not easy to find on social media, not very active on it. So if you like me, just follow Cup of Hemlock Theatre. That's where all of my fun theater opinions live. It's at COH Theater on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you're watching this on YouTube, like, share, subscribe. If you're listening to this as a podcast, do the podcast things.
Love it. Love it. And you can follow me at Mackenzie Horner, all social media platforms. You can check out my musical antics on Before the W Musical podcast, where Ryan and I did a 3-hour commentary on Fiddler on the Roof.
We did.
So,
R.I.P. Topol.
R.I.P. Topol. So definitely check that out. There's Jill's also appeared on a few episodes as well, doing some commentaries as well. So you definitely want to check those out too. So there we go, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we will see you all in our next episode. Thank you. Bye-bye.